The, the premise of the book is in three parts, and the three are interrelated. The first one is a historical perspective on how global health came to be and how we got where we are today. The second part is a dissection of where global health currently is, including a set of case studies from real life in the recent past and also contemporary events. The third part of the book is the forward-looking part, which says, having traced the history and having sought to diagnose all that is wrong, what is essential to do? So those are the three parts. Let me start from part one. Excuse me. How did global health come to be? Well, global health actually started out in forms called tropical medicine, and it was the health branch of colonial expeditions. As it happened, the colonial expedition had commercial interests, and the investors needed to mitigate the risks that came from those from the money they were deploying in the tropics at that time, to buy goods and services. And bear in mind, those goods were largely, not exclusively, human beings who were enslaved and transported across the Atlantic. So to cut a long story short, some of those merchants and institutional interests thought it would be a good idea to set up institutions that would detect, diagnose, and treat disease outbreaks so that their sailors and their traders will not be decimated by those strange diseases, strange to them. And in fact, the first among those institutions set up was the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, which was initially funded through a grant of £350 in 1898 by a slave ship owner called Alfred Jones. Alfred Jones was subsequently knighted by the King of the United Kingdom for his services. Especially what those services were, I don't know, because I don't know whether they asked the enslaved people, whether the enslaver should be knighted, but that's a separate story. The London School opened its doors 6 months after that, and then others sprang up in Amsterdam, in Brussels, etc. So fast forward, after the Second World War, the interest of expeditionary medicine, tropical medicine, if you like, coincided with the new era of foreign aid for development, of which health was a part. And those have evolved into the forms that we have today, whereby there's a lot of development assistance for health. There are lots of external financiers involved. And of course, many more schools of public health or tropical medicine. You should note that the current generation of philanthropy financiers, to some extent, not entirely, to some extent mirrors the financiers that exist, the philanthropies that existed at the end of the 19th century and the very early part of the 20th century. So much for the history, but bear in mind that the origins account substantially for the power imbalances that we see today. So what are those power imbalances? If you look at what is currently going on in global health, broadly speaking, you note that the locus of power, or if you like, the loci of power, reside principally in countries of the global north. And the loci of dependency reside principally, if not exclusively, in countries of the global south. And many of those are dressed up in the name of partnerships. But if you study and examine what is going on, you see that there's a clear pattern of dependency. And you saw that come to light during the time of COVID, when in fact it was countries of the global north who dictated what the global south could have, when it could have it, on whose terms and how. And that remains the case till today. If you look at the financing Everybody, please listen up. This is very important. Many countries, when they move from low income to lower middle income, and they go through what is called the economic transition of health or of health financing, the total health expenditure increases as countries become wealthier, total health expenditure per capita. But it is not necessarily in a way that is good for the poor people in those countries, because quite often government expenditures do not make up for whatever decline there is in external financing. Instead, it is compensated for by out-of-pocket expenditures. So to cite a country that I'm very familiar with, in Nigeria, roughly 75% of total health expenditures is out of pocket, which is the most inequitable form of financing that one can have. Now, why is all of this important? For two reasons. The current asymmetry of power results in two kinds of substitution. One is quantitative substitution. The other one is qualitative substitution. The quantitative substitution is such that when you get a large external grant coming into a country, what you find on average is that it displaces, not one-to-one, but it displaces some of what will have been the government's own expenditure. That is the quantitative substitution. But then there's also qualitative substitution, in which case external voices displace and undermine what should be legitimate political processes within a country itself, or policy processes. You might ask, why would anybody go along with that? And you have a good question. The reason is the following. The system is gamed. It's gamed because in many countries of the global south, not all of them, and they're to varying extents, those in positions of power and responsibility are all too happy to go along with the current dispensation because it absolves them of responsibility for the health of their own citizens. And then they blame it on others. In the North, it perpetuates what I call, it perpetuates a scenario in which I call, in which I refer to this kind of philanthropy that you see. I refer to this as a very deleterious system because it's basically narcissism, if you want to put it that way. It's narcissistic charity. You have narcissistic charity substituting for serious developmental assistance. So you see how it favors the interest of a certain group in the global north and a certain group in the global south. So looking ahead, what needs to be done? So much for the history, so much for the current dispensation, what needs to be done? I think the stark reality is that while colonialism was bad, there's absolutely no argument about that. And while its effects continue, the fundamental challenge now is actually that of new dependency of the many global south countries on the global north. And how do you break out of that? So in the book, I put forth the following measures. Number one is to end foreign aid for basic health services and commodities. That's the first thing. So no more foreign aid for things like insecticide-treated bed nets and the essential medicines and diagnostics on the lists published by WHO. No more foreign aid for routine prenatal care, for example. Why? Those interventions are very predictable, like immunization for basic childhood vaccines, for example. They're so predictable and they're so cost-effective. They should be the prime responsibilities of the countries themselves. This is not a call for immediate cessation. We can use the year 2030 as a target year because that is the target year to which all have agreed for achieving universal health coverage. So every country has 8 years to prepare. So that's number one. Number two is to reform technical assistance as we currently know it. Because quite often it supplants domestic expertise. And one way of reforming it is to say anyone who wants to keep financing technical assistance, such as what you get from agencies like USAID, whereby they fund primarily American contractors to go and do things in low-income countries or lower middle-income countries. Let them instead put up a drawdown fund. Let the countries themselves be responsible for identifying and procuring the services they need and to put the results in the open so that everybody can see it, it's transparent. Third is to refocus aid, foreign aid, where it's going to have higher value. So where is the added value higher? And it's in areas like global and regional public goods, research and development capacity, for example, and then institutions that will be durable and will be of most benefit to the recipient countries. So institutions such as National Institutes of Public Health, Centers for Disease Control, for example, biomedical research enterprises, and regulatory institutions, all of which will form the collective backbone of a long-term health system. So those are the three main thrusts of the book: the retrospective, an examination of today, and then what do we do for the future. Let me close with what I call my favorite sentence in the book, and it's the very last sentence in the very last chapter, and that is, a brighter future is possible. So I turn it back to you, Segun. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Soji. So let's go to some questions on the book. You've already answered some of the questions I initially wrote down, but so what's the reason for you writing the book at this moment in time? What led you to decide to write the book at this point in time? And why now?
That's a great question. I have written versions of this book in my head many times, but I frankly never had the time to sit down and really put it on paper. And then I came across a quote attributed to, I believe it was Maya Angelou, who said, I think it was Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison. I'm mixing up the two of them. I'm having a senior moment, apologize. Who said, if there's a book you wish to read and you cannot find it, then it's your duty to write the book. And this was the book I really wanted to see in writing. So I decided to write it. Why? I think that for today's policymakers and for the emerging leaders, so both for current leaders and the emerging leaders, it's very important to have a concrete dissection of what is going on in global health from the perspective of power dynamics. That is not sufficient. It's also necessary, I think, to chart a different course. And in particular, I thought it was important to challenge constructively the notion that anything that is not going well in low and lower middle income countries must be the fault of somebody else. That's true. Many things there are the faults of somebody else dating back to colonial times. But at the same time, the solutions lie within the countries themselves. So those are the combination of reasons I decided to write a book, and I finally was able to devote some time to it. Back to you.
Right, thanks, Soji. Now, you also made reference, I mean, in your brief comment,